Welcome to the Butterfly Effect. I'm Chris Horner. This is stage 7, Tour de Suisse. Today's stage, a mammoth stage at just under 200 kilometers, about 125 miles in length, and 4 big rated categorized climbs. Now, with 25 kilometers to go, there's a category 3. That's going to be the smallest one on today's stage. But remember, it comes 25 kilometers from the finish, and then after you drop down that, a small little valley, and then you go up the last climb. The last climb at 12.5 kilometers long and just about 8.5% is a hard climb. Now, I've told you guys many times here on the Butterfly Effect, once you start getting above 6, it becomes in the area of just the climbers. When you're talking about the European professional peloton, you start getting above 7. Now you start getting to the pure best climbers in the world in today's race. Like I told you, 8.5% average, all the way up to the summit finish of today's last road stage in Tour de Suisse. Now, before the race gets started, let's talk about what's happening on the general classification, because any director sportive working for a big pro cycling team in Europe should understand what's on the table when you look at the top 3 at the general classification. Jakob Fuglsang, gone top 10s and Grand Tours. He's had results in week-long races, but it's always fluctuated throughout his career. When he's on really good form, anything's possible. Now, you look at second on the general classification, we're talking about Geraint Thomas from Ineos. He's only 1 second back on the GC of Jakob Fuglsang, and he's a pure time trialist. We know he's won the Tour de France in 2018, but he's won week-long stage races throughout his career. So, Geraint Thomas, on paper, when you're starting this race, has to be the big-time favorite. Now, Agita from Bora Hansgrohe, he's just a little bit further back on general classification and still holding a podium spot here at Tour de Suisse, starting this last road stage. So you got to keep in mind, looking at Agita, you know he's a pure climber in every sense of the word. Even better than the other 2 in front of him when you're talking about throughout the season from February all the way to October. So you always got to keep an eye on Agita from Bora Hansgrohe. But if you're the DS from Israel Premier Tech, you have to be talking to Jakob Fuglsang and start telling him that on paper, Ineos Geraint Thomas has to be the race leader here. If you're Jakob Fuglsang, you should always be looking at Geraint Thomas as actually wearing the yellow jersey at this point in time, because with only a 1 second advantage over him when you're talking about a 25 kilometer long TT in tomorrow's stage, you gotta know Geraint Thomas is the outright favorite amongst these podium contenders right here, top 3, stage 7 Tour de Suisse. Now, when the racing gets started, it's 14 riders up the road, and they got a 6.5 minute lead on the peloton behind, being led by Ineos and Israel Premier Tech. Up in that group of 14, there's one guy that's a threat on general classification because he's only about 4 minutes and 30 seconds back on GC, and that's Mathieu Burgodeau. That's the Total Energy riders. So that's putting a little bit of pressure on the GC team back there of Ineos, who have what I believe to be the virtual leader here on stage 7, and then Jakob Fuglsang, who's the actual leader by 1 second. So Israel Premier Tech, Ineos are working together beautifully to keep that time gap in check. They'll bring that time gap down to about 4 minutes with about 50 kilometers to go. And in that group of 14, there is the sprinter there, Michael Matthews. He's done a lot of work, never missing turns, and always staying at the front. Anytime the sprint challenge line comes up, he'll take maximum points to gain more time for his sprint leaders competition here at Tour de Suisse on this last road stage 7. Now, when we look at that group of 14, there's some good climbers in that group because Thibaut Pinot from FDJ is in there. Oscar Rodriguez from Movistar is in there. Ion Izagirre from Cofidis. Alexei Lusenko from Astana, he's got to be considered a climber. Masnada from Quickstep, he's in this break. And remember, he was doing some devastating work on yesterday's stage 6 here at Tour de Suisse. So we know he can normally climb, and he's got a teammate with Van Wilder in here. So he's got some help. Other teams to pay attention to is going to be AG2R because they have 3 numbers in this front group. It's going to be 2 Clements and 1 Nicholas. Now, with that group, 14 strong, everybody's rotating through and working really well. But like I said, behind Ineos and Israel Premier Tech are playing no games here on stage 7, and they're working well together with Daryl Empey taking big pulls on the front and Luke Rowe. Now, like I said, under 50 kilometers to go. It's going to be about a 4-minute gap on the peloton. And then when we start with 25 kilometers to go, that gap is still around 4 minutes when we start the category 3. They're working smooth together, and it's the sprinter, Michael Matthews, that's doing bulk of the pulling up this 3 kilometers climb. Now, Michael Matthews is doing this because Everybody in this group, the other 13 riders, is allowing Michael Matthews to take all the sprint competition points that he can gain here on this final stage. They'll come off that Category 3, drop down the descent, and Michael Matthews is take maximum points for the second sprint line points here on Stage 7. After that, Michael Matthews stays on the front when we start reaching this last and final climb with 13 kilometers to go. That climb starts, and then Michael Matthews is on the front. This is a gentleman thing here to do from the Bike Exchange rider. He's riding the front, helping out the other 13 riders. Sure, back there, he appreciated that all these guys didn't compete for any of these sprint points, and now he's paying them back by riding the front here starting this last and final climb, even though it's 8.5%. Now that group won't stay together very long because it's going to be Van Wilder, the quick step rider, that throws in a big attack, and there's 5 or 6 guys there with his teammate Fasnato still locked on. This point in time, I was sitting on the couch. I thought, wow, this is a great tactic right here because Fausto Masnada here from Quickstep, remember yesterday he was drilling it on the climb and everyone just kept staying on his wheel, and then he lost yesterday's stage. So at this moment, I'm thinking with Quickstep Van Wilder at the front, if Masnada has some good legs, Van Wilder can tire out the field here, and then Masnada can go. And remember, this is an 8.5% climb, not like yesterday's climb that was more about 7%, even maybe a little bit less going up most of that climb. But doesn't take very long, and Fausto Masnada is about the first to crack. And as the group kind of somewhat comes back together, it's going to be Alexei Lusenko from Astana that throws in attack. He'll split it to about 3 riders there, as it's Alexei Lusenko, Ion Izagirre, and Van Wilder holding on for dear life. Van Wilder's the next rider from Quickstep to get popped. That leaves 2 riders up front with Alexei Lusenko and Ion Izagirre. Then Ion Izagirre throwing a big acceleration. Now the Cofidis rider's going solo, and Alexei Lusenko's not looking too fabulous on the pedals. Behind Thibaut Pinot, the FDJ rider, is solo trying to chase the 2 riders up front who are both in their world of pain. Ion Izagirre, in my belief, sitting on the couch, looks the best. Actually doesn't look like he's too bad at this point in time, but things might change later as we get further up the climb. We go down the climb to the GC favorites. It's Ineos on the front with Alex Aramburu. Now, if you're wondering why the field isn't blowing apart, the reason why is because of all the disappearance from the bigger teams. And when we're talking about Team Ineos, normally if it was Yates that was feeling healthy and Geraint Thomas was feeling fantastic still at this point in time, with Yates still in the race and being a GC favorite and a good climber, you would have different guys pulling. Right now, Alex Aramburu would just be throwing in 100% at the bottom of this climb, and then it would be Geraint Thomas taking over for Adam Yates. Now, when we go to today's stage, it's just Alex Aramburu back there. This is a big difference, and I remember many times throughout my career racing against CSC, for example, when we would start these climbs, it would be Fabien Cancellara at the Tour de France that just blowing up the field at the bottom for the first few hundred meters, if not 1 or 2 kilometers. Then it would be followed by 1, if not 2 of the Schleck brothers, then Carlos Sastre, who won the Tour de France, followed by Ivan Basso finishing off. So the speeds would be much faster. Today's stage, because of all those disappearance of teammates, now all of a sudden Alex Aramburu is on the front. But the field of GC favorites is not blowing up back there necessarily. Now, it'll be able to take until about 10 kilometers to go, and it's going to be Max Schachmann for Bora Hansgrohe that start putting their plan A into position here with 10 kilometers to go. Max starts setting a steady tempo there and starts bringing the field a little bit smaller and reduced in size. But Ineos look fantastic. Now, let's fast forward back up to the breakaway here as Ion Izagirre started to have this race what looked like to be wrapped up in the bag because the gaps were massive back there to Alexei Lusenko and Thibaut Pinot. But Thibaut Pinot, he'll dig deep on the pedals. I don't know where he's finding the form. It's a second win for certain as he'll start to bring back Alexei Lusenko. Up front, Ion Izagirre, who I thought looked fabulous, is starting to fall apart under 5 kilometers to go. Once he grabs the ice bag from his soigneur, we'll see him stuff it behind his shoulder blades in the back there, and as bike gets a little bit crooked, he keeps it upright and starts accelerating again on the pedals. But he doesn't look like the same rider at this point in time with just under 4.5 kilometers to go. Now back there, Thibaut Pinot has dislodged Alexei Lusenko, and he's on a solo mission to try to win here at stage 7. Back in the peloton, it was Max Schachmann that was riding the front, and then Remco Evenepoel throws in attack that's followed right away from race leader Jakob Fuglsang. Fuglsang looks back, the gap isn't necessarily there, and the 2 riders will kind of ease up as is Danny Martinez from Ineos pulling Garrett Thomas along. Now let's fast forward back up to the breakaway riders. With just over 2 kilometers to go, Thibaut Pinot, the FDJ rider, has caught Cofidis Ion Izagirre up front. He doesn't hang around too long. He throws in acceleration. Ion Izagirre's getting gapped by the FDJ rider. Now let's go back down to the GC favorites because we're starting to have some action happen back there with the pulling of Danny Martinez for Garrett Thomas. Danny's doing a fabulous job. We started to see Max Schachmann come out the back for Bora Hansgrohe. Shortly after that, it's going to be his teammate that's riding 5th on the general classification, Felix Großschartner, come out. After that, it's going to be the guys further down on general classification, but still in the top 10. Stefan Kuhn's coming out the back. Danny Martinez is throwing some power down on the pedals as that group is down to under 15 riders. Now let's fast forward and go back up to the front because Thibaut Pinot is doing a marvelous job. Again, I don't know where he found the legs. He looked miserable at the beginning of this climb, but somehow he has tempoed his way past everyone, and now he's going solo here trying to win stage 7. He puts in some big digs on the pedals with the final 500 meters, and he'll take a solo victory here at stage 7 Tour de Suisse for FDJ. Behind in second will be Oscar Rodriguez from Movistar, who passed everyone else, and we didn't get to see it on camera. He'll come through for second. Alexei Lusenko, the Astana rider who started all the big attacks at the beginning of this climb, will round out the podium. Now let's go back down the hill because Danny Martinez is doing his final pull as he sent out a lot of the top 10 favorites on the general classification out the back. He's got that group down to 4 guys because on his wheels, the top 3 of the general classification. It's Vogelsang there, Garrett Thomas is there, and Agita from Bora Hansgrohe's there. Danny Martinez finishes pull. He pulls off hard right. He looks over to the left at the 3 favorites here at Tour de Suisse, all locked together. Agita, Bora Hansgrohe, he does not hesitate. Throws in a massive acceleration. Jakob Vogelsang starts to follow with Garrett Thomas stuck on his wheel. But Vogelsang cannot hold the wheel of Agita, and the gap starts to open. It's getting bigger and bigger, about 10 seconds now. Vogelsang is still pulling on the front. He's pulling 500 meters after that attack. He's going to pull one kilometer after that attack. In fact, Vogelsang's going to pull all the way to 500 meters to go. I don't know what's happening here as I'm sitting on the couch or what Jakob Vogelsang's thinking from Israel Premier Tech, but you don't want to be pulling Garrett Thomas to the finish with 500 meters to go. We all saw it coming right. Garrett Thomas throws in an acceleration off of Jakob Vogelsang's wheel as he tries to do damage control to Agita's time up front. He does. He comes in just under 10 seconds here, and Jakob Vogelsang will lose 20 seconds to Agita when he crosses today's final road stage of Tour of Suisse. Now, Jakob Vogelsang, I don't know what you were thinking. At 2.5 kilometers to go when Agita attacked, I don't know why you thought you needed to pull Garrett Thomas. If we go backwards in the tape all the way down to the feed zone with about 9 kilometers to go, it's Garrett Thomas there pulling over. He's grabbing an ice bag and he's grabbing some food from his soigneur. Up front, it was Max Schachmann chasing, and that gap starts opening up to Garrett Thomas. And Garrett Thomas, we'll see him in the video, he'll eat some food and then he'll take the time to sit up, stuff an ice pack between his shoulder blades in the back, and he'll easily close the gap. When you see that, when you're sitting on the couch and you see Garrett Thomas open a gap on purpose because he wants a little bit of space so he doesn't crash, and then close the gap easily while he's not even touching his handlebars, and Vogelsang's on his wheel. Vogelsang should have been able to see firsthand, even better than what I saw on the TV screen, that clearly Garrett Thomas is on form. Now we fast forward back up to just over 2 kilometers to go, about 2.5, I believe, when Agita was throwing in that tack. Right then, Jakob Vogelsang needed to remember what he saw in the legs there of Garrett Thomas going through that feed zone and how easily he closed the gap up to Max Schachmann and his teammate Danny Martinez. He didn't, and was a nightmare outcome here for Jakob Vogelsang because of that. With that time gap now up to the 2 leaders in front of Vogelsang. Vogelsang's going to drop off the race leader's jersey by about 20 seconds when we go into tomorrow's individual time trial stage. Agita holds the race leader's jersey with a fantastic ride and a big attack that lit this race up with 2.5 kilometers to go. But you got to ask yourself, Garrett Thomas has to be the favorite going into tomorrow's individual time trial stage. Now, when Jakob Vogelsang crossed the line here on stage 7, he does an interview and talks about how he was upset at Garrett Thomas for wheel sucking all the way up until 500 meters to go. Vogelsang, what did you think was going to happen if you're going to pull him for 1.5 kilometers, if not 2 kilometers into the finish with 500 meters to go? You got to expect Geraint Thomas is going to light you up. And again, if you go down to that feed zone and you see how easily he closed the gap up to Max Schachmann, who was pushing hard on the pedals, you got to understand at that moment that Geraint Thomas is on good form, so there's no reason to be chasing Higuita unless, of course, you're just fighting for a podium position here on the general classification. If that's the case, Jakob Vogelsang's tactics there on this last part of this stage 7 was fantastic because you hold Higuita, who can't time trial, to a relatively short distance, and you already gave up a shot at the individual win with Geraint Thomas being able to out time trial you in tomorrow's stage. Now again, they're still close on all three amongst the general classification starting tomorrow's individual time trial stage. But unless Geraint Thomas's legs just fall off, he should be able to wrap up this Tour de Suisse here to win a victory for Ineos before the Tour de France starts. Now, there's a lot of drama throughout this year's Dauphiné so far with Adam Yates, Ineos, departing here, and you got to wonder what Ineos look like at the Tour de France. I've always thought personally Geraint Thomas was their only card that can run at all and give them any chance of winning against the two Slovenians at the Tour de France. And Geraint Thomas, if he can wrap up this win here, which I believe he should, almost 100% believe he should after tomorrow's individual time trial stage finishes, then going into the Tour de France, he could be making himself the 100% leader here for Team Ineos, with Yates leaving with COVID earlier on the earlier stages here at Tour de Suisse. Now, Higuita, the Bora Hansgrohe rider, he should be able to hold a podium when tomorrow's individual time trial stage finish here for general classification. But remember, when you look back at the general classification, 4th is going to be Nielsen Palace EF Education. So if he can have a fabulous individual time trial in tomorrow's last stage, he may be able to move himself up to a podium on the general classification when everything's said and done. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Tomorrow's final individual time trial of Stage 8 Tour de Suisse is still to come, and there's still some drama left here at Tour de Suisse. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next edition.